Nora Bennett woke before the alarm on the morning of her 39th birthday. For a few gentle seconds, she forgot the ache in her knees, the unpaid bill folded beside the kettle, and the cold apartment window that rattled whenever buses passed below. She looked at the small calendar pinned above her sink, saw the red circle around the date, and allowed herself one quiet smile. It was not because she expected a party. Nora had learned long ago that birthdays were often ordinary days wearing a fragile ribbon. Still, she wore her best blue blouse under her gray housekeeper uniform, pinned her silver name badge straighter than usual, and carried a tin of lemon cookies to the Harlow Grand Hotel, where she had worked for 9 years. The hotel stood on Harbor Avenue like a polished white ship, all brass doors, marble floors, and windows tall enough to reflect the clouds. Rich guests stepped out of black cars and crossed the lobby without noticing the women who kept their rooms clean. Nora noticed everything. She knew which suite needed extra towels, which elderly guest liked tea at midnight, which lonely child hid crayons under the bed. She had saved the owner from embarrassment more times than anyone counted. She had covered stains before galas, mended curtains before investors arrived, and once spent an entire night rocking little Grace Harlow through a fever while her father, Vincent, argued on conference calls downstairs. Vincent Harlow was 46, handsome in the tired way of men who own buildings but not peace. He rarely raised his voice. That was what made the morning worse. When Nora entered the service corridor, the other housekeepers looked away. The laundry carts were lined against the wall, but nobody moved. At the end of the hall stood Vincent beside his mother, Helena Harlow, the woman who treated the hotel as a throne and the staff as furniture. Helena wore pearls before breakfast and kindness only in photographs. Nora tried to smile. "Good morning, Mr. Harlow." "Good morning, Mrs. Harlow." Helena did not answer. Vincent held a cream envelope in both hands. "Nora," he said, "I need a word." The office smelled of coffee and expensive lilies. Nora stood on the carpet with her tin of cookies still in her fingers. Vincent closed the door but would not meet her eyes. He spoke carefully, as if each sentence had been written for him by someone colder. "The hotel is entering a new phase. We need to restructure staff housing and certain positions. Effective today, your employment is terminated." For a moment, Nora heard nothing except the faint hum of the air conditioner. She blinked once, twice, and looked from Vincent to Helena. Terminated. The word did not belong to her birthday. It did not belong to 9 years of dawn shifts, late nights, and quiet loyalty. She whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" Vincent tightened his jaw. Helena answered for him. "It is not useful to make scenes, Nora. You should be grateful we are being generous." Generous. Helena opened a leather folder and slid a set of old keys across the desk. They landed beside Nora's cookies with a hard little sound. "As part of your final arrangement," Helena said, "the family is giving you a property, an inn outside town. It has been empty for years, but it is shelter. More than most women in your position receive." Nora stared at the keys. An inn sounded impossible, almost beautiful, until she saw the photograph clipped inside the folder. The Ashford Inn had no roof over half its second floor. The front porch sagged like a broken jaw. The windows were black from an old fire. Vines swallowed the sign. It was not a gift. It was a grave with walls. Helena smiled as if she had handed Nora a jewel. "Happy birthday," she said. Later, Nora would learn that Helena had already sent the photograph to her private charity group with a caption that read, "The Queen of Sheets finally has a palace." The women had replied with laughing faces and voice messages bright with cruelty. But in that office, Nora knew only the heat behind her eyes and the shame of being too poor to refuse. She picked up the keys because she had nowhere else to go. She left the lemon cookies unopened on Vincent's desk. No one in the lobby stopped her. No one said thank you. She walked past the fountain she had polished for 9 years, through the brass doors, and into a birthday rain that turned the city silver. By dusk, with one suitcase, a thin quilt, and the keys cutting into her palm, Nora stood before the Ashford Inn. The building leaned against the hillside like it was tired of standing. Rain dripped through the burned roof into rooms that smelled of ash, mold, and old silence. She stepped inside, set her suitcase on the least wet patch of floor, and cried until her throat hurt. Then lightning flashed through the broken windows and showed her the empty dining room, the wide fireplace, the cracked counter, and a wall where sunlight might one day come in. Nora wiped her face with her sleeve. The people who gave her this place had meant for it to finish her. They had no idea they had handed her the only thing she had ever needed, a door no one could close in her face again. The first night inside the Ashford Inn was colder than Nora expected. She spread her quilt beside the old fireplace and used her suitcase as a pillow because the floorboards near the corner felt less damp than the rest. Rain tapped through a hole in the roof and collected in a metal roasting pan she found beneath the counter. Each drop sounded like a clock counting down to something she could not name. Her phone showed no missed calls. The hotel had erased her by sunset. Even Grace, the little girl she had once carried through a fever, was away at boarding school and did not know. At 2 a.m, Nora sat up and looked around. The dining room still smelled of smoke, though the fire had happened before she ever knew the place existed. The wallpaper had peeled into long yellow strips. A family of mice made busy sounds near the pantry. She wanted to run back to town, knock on the hotel door, and beg for any work at all. Then she imagined Helena's smile. She imagined Vincent's silence. The thought hardened inside her. Poverty had made Nora afraid many times, but it had never made her crawl. When morning came, the rain stopped. Gray light slipped through the broken windows and revealed more ruin than the night had shown. The stairs were unsafe. The kitchen sink was rusted through. The back garden was a square of weeds, old bottles, and blackberry thorns. A sign in the yard still read Ashford Inn, though 2 letters hung sideways. Nora stood on the porch with a broom she found behind the bar. For a long minute she did not move. Then she swept one clean line through the ash. Across the narrow road, a curtain shifted. Mrs. May Clark, a widow of 71 with white hair rolled like a cloud, had watched the abandoned inn for 11 years. She had seen teenagers break windows, raccoons nest under the porch, and real estate men measure the land before giving up. She had also seen Helena Harlow's car come 2 weeks earlier, its driver stepping around puddles while Helena filmed the ruin with her phone and laughed. When May saw Nora sweeping alone in a blue blouse, she put soup in a jar, wrapped bread in a towel, and crossed the road. "You will need breakfast before you fight a house," May said through the bent gate. Nora almost refused because pride was the last coin she owned. Then the smell of chicken soup rose through the cold air, and her stomach betrayed her. She opened the gate. May walked in as if the inn were already respectable. She did not ask why Nora was there. She did not ask what mistake had brought her to a burned building with one suitcase. She only set the food on the porch rail and pointed at the roof. "That corner will need tar paper before the next storm. My late husband kept some in the shed. You can have it if you promise not to climb anything without sense." Nora laughed for the first time in 24 hours, a cracked sound that surprised them both. "I am not sure I have sense left." "Then borrow mine," May said. By the end of the first week, Nora had learned the inn's moods. It groaned at sunrise, settled at noon, and whispered in the wind after dark. She cleared 3 rooms downstairs, hauled blackened boards into a pile, scrubbed soot from the dining room wall until her hands blistered, and slept each night with the exhaustion of someone who had earned every breath. May came every morning with advice and something warm. Sometimes soup. Sometimes coffee. Once, a jar of peach jam so sweet it made Nora close her eyes. People in the village of Bellwether did not welcome quickly. They watched first. The mechanic slowed his truck when he passed. 2 children on bicycles stopped at the gate and argued about whether Nora was a ghost. At the market, the cashier glanced at the ash in Nora's hair and asked if she was staying long. Nora lifted her chin and said, "I hope so." Saying it aloud changed something. Hope was frightening, but it also had muscles. On Saturday, a man arrived with a pickup full of lumber. He wore a faded green jacket and carried himself like someone used to lifting heavy things without being asked. May introduced him as Eli Mercer, owner of the hardware store, father of a teenage son, widower, and the only man in Bellwether who could repair a hinge and keep a secret. Eli looked at the porch, the roof, and Nora's bandaged hands. He did not smile too quickly. "May says you are fighting a house," he said. "I brought reinforcements." "I cannot pay you," Nora answered, ashamed of how small her voice sounded. "I did not bring an invoice." That was Eli's way. He did not make speeches. He measured the porch posts, replaced the worst boards, showed Nora how to hold a crowbar without twisting her wrist, and left before she could cry in front of him. The next morning, he returned with nails. The morning after that, with tar paper. On the fourth day, he brought his son Caleb, a quiet 17-year-old with earbuds around his neck and grief still hiding behind his eyes. Caleb painted the gate without being told and pretended not to enjoy May's praise. Work turned the hours merciful. Nora tore down ruined curtains, scraped floors, carried broken furniture into the yard, and sorted anything salvageable. In the pantry, she found 3 blue plates, a cracked mixing bowl, and an old recipe box swollen from damp. Most cards were unreadable, but one survived, written in a looping hand. Apple cake for guests who arrive sad. Nora stood in the dusty pantry holding that card and felt something open inside her. Before hotel work swallowed her life, Nora had baked. Her grandmother taught her to measure flour by touch and fruit by smell. As a girl, Nora won ribbons at county fairs with cinnamon rolls and berry pies. At the Harlow Grand, she had often helped the kitchen when guests demanded impossible desserts. Helena accepted compliments for pastries Nora had finished at midnight. Vincent once praised a lemon tart in front of donors, never knowing Nora had made the crust after the chef quit. Baking had been her private language, a way to say love when nobody asked her to speak. The Ashford kitchen looked unusable, but Nora began there anyway. She cleaned the old brick oven until red showed through the soot. Eli found a second-hand stove from a church basement. May brought curtains with tiny yellow flowers. Caleb sanded the counter. Little by little, the burned room remembered it had once fed people. One evening, after 3 weeks of repairs, Nora mixed flour, apples, sugar, cinnamon, and the last of May's butter in the cracked bowl. The cake rose unevenly, burned at one edge, and filled the inn with a smell so tender that Nora had to sit down. May tasted the first slice at the wobbly table. Her eyes widened. Then she leaned back and looked at Nora as if seeing her in a new light. Child, if grief had a door, this cake would open it. Eli arrived to return a ladder and found the 2 women laughing over crumbs. Nora offered him a slice. He ate standing by the counter, serious as a judge. Caleb took 2 pieces and asked, with teenage caution, whether there might be more tomorrow. Nora went to sleep that night with flour on her sleeve and a strange warmth in her chest. The inn still leaked. The stairs still frightened her, but for the first time, it smelled less like smoke and more like morning. At the Harlow Grand, Nora's absence became visible in ways the owners did not expect. Towels arrived late to suites. The lobby lilies wilted because no one changed the water. Grace called from school asking why Nora had not answered her birthday message, and Vincent said Nora had moved on to better opportunities, though the lie sat badly on his tongue. Helena replaced Nora with 2 temporary workers and complained that Good Help had vanished from the world. She never admitted that Good Help had been fired in her office while holding cookies. Helena had reasons for wanting Nora gone. Her niece Celeste needed a position at the hotel and a staff apartment after a failed marriage. The old arrangement, with Nora occupying the small room behind the laundry on long shifts, was inconvenient. Helena had told Vincent that Nora gossiped about guests, stole soap, and frightened younger staff with bitterness. Vincent had believed enough to avoid asking Nora directly. He had been raised to trust his mother's certainty more than his own conscience. That training had cost him more than he knew. Meanwhile, Bellwether began to soften. A retired teacher named Mr. Alvarez brought a box of books for the future lobby. The mechanic repaired Nora's wheelbarrow and claimed he had only been passing by with tools in his hand. 2 children who had called her a ghost started leaving smooth stones on the porch steps. May announced at the diner that Nora's apple cake could make angels jealous. By the next afternoon, 3 people knocked on the inn door asking whether she sold slices. Nora said no at first. Selling meant risk. Risk meant failure where everyone could see. But the next week, when the electric bill arrived and her savings thinned to almost nothing, she baked 6 apple cakes and wrote a sign on cardboard. Slices $1. The sign looked childish against the grand old doorway. Nora nearly took it down. Then a school bus stopped at the corner, and Caleb bought the first slice with coins from his pocket. He ate it on the porch and told every student who passed that it was better than the cafeteria, which, in Bellwether, was enough to start a movement. By sunset, Nora had sold every slice. She counted $27 on the counter, then counted it again. Not because the amount was large, but because it had come from something she made with her own hands in a building meant to shame her. May made her tape the first dollar to the wall. Eli watched from the doorway, saw Nora blinking hard, and looked away so she could keep her pride. That night she wrote a list in a notebook. Flour, sugar, eggs, apples, coffee, candles, maybe hope. The first month became 2. 2 became 4. Winter loosened its grip, and the inn changed color with the season. The porch stood straight. The dining room wall wore fresh cream paint donated by the church. Nora hung the old blue plates above the counter, their cracks turned toward the light like scars that had decided to be beautiful. She planted rosemary, mint, and marigolds in the cleared garden. May said every respectable place needed flowers, even if the roof still complained. Nora named the little business the Lantern Table because, during the worst weeks, she had worked by a kerosene lantern when the power failed. She painted the name herself on a rescued board. Her letters were uneven, but the meaning was perfect. The Lantern Table opened officially on a Friday morning with 8 muffins, 3 apple cakes, a pot of coffee, and May sitting at the front table like a queen guarding a castle. The first customers were neighbors who pretended they were only curious. They became regulars before they admitted it. Mr. Alvarez came for coffee and stayed to grade papers. The mechanic came for muffins and gossip he swore he hated. A young mother brought her toddler because the child slept better after warm milk at Nora's counter. Eli came after closing to fix what broke and drink coffee he always praised too late, when Nora had turned away and could safely smile. Eli's kindness was quiet enough to trust. He never asked Nora for gratitude. He asked whether the back door stuck. He asked whether she needed firewood. He asked, one evening while rain tapped on the repaired roof, whether she missed the hotel. Nora wiped the counter for longer than necessary. "I miss who I thought I was there," she said. "I thought loyalty made a home." "Sometimes loyalty only proves you were capable of love," Eli answered. "It does not prove they deserved it." That sentence stayed with Nora for days. She carried it while kneading dough, while sweeping the porch, while lying awake, listening to the house breathe. She had spent years measuring her worth by how little trouble she caused. At the Lantern Table, trouble came anyway, but so did laughter, fingerprints on windows, spilled coffee, children asking for extra glaze, and May announcing every new pastry as if it were a town holiday. Nora began to understand that being needed was not the same as being used. The viral moment happened by accident. A travel nurse named Piper stopped at the Lantern Table during a storm after missing the highway turn. She ordered coffee, ate a slice of apple cake, and asked Nora about the blackened beams still visible above the dining room. Nora told the story in plain sentences. "Fired on my birthday. Given this place as settlement. Decided not to let it kill me." Piper listened with tears in her eyes. Before she left, she asked permission to take photos. The post appeared that night. It showed the old inn from the road, the repaired porch, Nora flower-dusted and smiling shyly beside the counter, and a before photograph May had kept from the first week. The caption said, "A woman was handed a burned inn as an insult. She turned it into the warmest table in Bellwether." By morning, the post had thousands of shares. By afternoon, Nora's phone would not stop ringing. Visitors came from 3 counties. Some wanted cake, some wanted photographs, some wanted to tell Nora their own stories of being discarded. A man who had lost his job after 30 years cried into his coffee. A young woman leaving a cruel marriage bought a muffin and whispered, "I needed to see somebody survive." Nora did not know how to be famous, so she kept refilling cups, cutting slices, and making sure nobody left hungry. A local news crew arrived on a Thursday. Nora almost refused, but May said people needed good news that did not lie. The reporter filmed the dining room, the garden, the rescued blue plates, the taped dollar, and the old burned beams Nora had chosen not to hide. The segment aired at 6. Grace Harlow saw it first in her dorm common room. She stood frozen before the television as Nora's face filled the screen. The woman she loved, like family, had not moved to better opportunities. She had been thrown away. Grace called her father that night. "Dad, why is Nora living in a burned inn?" Vincent was in his office overlooking the hotel lobby. He had not watched the news. At first, he tried to answer with the phrases Helena had given him. Then Grace cried, and the sound cut through 9 years of his practiced avoidance. "She loved us," Grace said. "She loved me. How could you let this happen?" Vincent had no answer. After the call, he searched the segment online. He watched Nora speak gently about rebuilding. He watched the reporter show the first photographs of the ruined inn. He watched customers praise her as if she had always belonged to them. Then another clip appeared below the video, shared by an anonymous account. It was Helena's charity group message, leaked by a woman who had finally become ashamed. The clip showed the photograph of the ruined inn and Helena's caption, "The Queen of Sheets finally has a palace." Laughter followed in bright little bursts. Vincent felt something inside him drop. He replayed the clip once, twice. On the third time, he turned it off and sat in the dark office while the hotel glittered below. He remembered Nora's tin of cookies on his desk. He remembered the way she had asked what she did wrong. He remembered not looking at her because looking would have required courage. For the first time, Vincent understood that silence could be an act, and his had been cruel. The internet moved faster than guilt. By morning, Helena Harlow's name was everywhere. Donors withdrew from her charity luncheon. Guests canceled rooms at the Harlow Grand and wrote reviews about cruelty polished with brass. Former employees began posting stories. A bellman said Nora had paid for his medicine once. A cook said she had covered shifts without asking credit. A driver said Helena never learned his name. The caption became a symbol, repeated under every article. "The Queen of Sheets finally has a palace." Only now the words accused the woman who wrote them. Helena responded as she always had, with control. She told Vincent the story was exaggerated, that Nora had manipulated public sympathy, that staff always turned bitter when they left. Vincent asked directly whether Nora had stolen. Helena waved a hand. He asked who heard Nora gossip. Helena changed the subject. He asked why the inn was described as a gift if the paperwork had never been registered. Helena's eyes sharpened. "That property is still useful," she said. "Do not be sentimental. Useful." The word revealed the shape of her next plan. 3 days later, while Nora was glazing lemon cakes before dawn, a black sedan stopped outside the lantern table. A man in a charcoal suit stepped out holding an envelope. He did not order coffee. He did not look at the sign or the flowers. He asked for Nora Bennett in a voice that made May set down her cup. Nora wiped her hands on her apron and came forward. The envelope contained a legal notice. The Harlow family claimed the Ashford Inn had been provided only as temporary staff housing, not as a permanent transfer. Nora was ordered to vacate within 30 days or face court action. For a moment, the warm room vanished. Nora saw only the first night, the rain in the roasting pan, the blackened walls, the suitcase on the floor. She felt the old office carpet under her shoes and Helena's smile cutting through the air. May read the notice and cursed, for the first time Nora had ever heard. Eli arrived 10 minutes later and found Nora sitting at the counter with flour on her wrists and tears sliding down her face. She pushed the paper toward him. He read every line slowly. When he looked up, his quietness had changed into something fierce. "They do not get to throw you into a fire and sue you for becoming warm," he said. The town rallied before Nora could ask. May called everyone she knew, which was nearly everyone. Mr. Alvarez contacted a former student who had become a legal aid attorney. Caleb made a donation jar that said "Save our lantern" in marker thick enough to be seen from the road. Customers arrived with checks, coins, documents, photographs, statements, and anger. People who had once watched Nora from behind curtains now stood on her porch like a wall. Still, fear returned at night. Public love did not erase legal paper. Nora lay awake imagining a judge ordering her out. She imagined Helena walking through the dining room, touching the blue plates, saying none of it had ever been hers. The inn had become more than shelter. It held May's soup, Eli's repairs, Caleb's first shy laugh after his mother's death, the taped dollar, the garden, the stories strangers had left over coffee. Losing it would be like losing proof that she had survived. Vincent learned of the lawsuit from Grace, who sent him the news article with one line, "Fix this, or lose me too." He went to Helena's private sitting room, where she was dictating a statement about defamation. "Mother," he said, "what action did you file against Nora?" Helena did not look up. "A necessary correction. You told me the inn was part of her settlement. I told you many things while you were finally learning to manage staff." The contempt in her voice exhausted him. Vincent opened the folder he had brought from the archives. He had searched late into the night, past payroll records, property deeds, and old insurance correspondence. At the bottom of a box labeled Ashford, he found a transfer agreement prepared years earlier when the family planned to dispose of unwanted properties for tax purposes. Nora's name had been added after her termination. Vincent's signature was there. Helena's initials were there as witness. The only missing step was registration. You knew it was a transfer, Vincent said. Helena set down her pen. That building was worthless when she received it. It became valuable because she worked. It became embarrassing because she talked. No, he said. It became embarrassing because you laughed. The silence between them was the truest conversation they had ever had. Helena reached for authority, for motherhood, for every invisible chain she had used on him since childhood. She said he was ungrateful. She said family must protect family. She said Nora was a servant who had forgotten her place. Vincent listened until the words lost power. Then he put the folder under his arm and walked out. He drove to the county clerk's office without calling ahead. For years, assistants had handled forms for him. That morning, he stood in line like everyone else, holding the file that proved his cowardice and Nora's right. The clerk reviewed the documents, requested identification, and asked whether he understood that recording the deed would make the transfer final. Vincent looked through the window at a street vendor selling flowers to office workers and thought of Nora sweeping ash on her first morning. Yes, he said, I understand. At the lantern table, the line of customers had thinned after lunch. Nora was wiping tables when Vincent's car stopped across the road. Conversation fell quiet. May stepped onto the porch. Eli came out of the kitchen with a towel in his hand. Nora felt her body remember the office, the envelope, the word terminated. Vincent crossed the road alone, carrying a brown folder. He looked thinner than she remembered, or maybe guilt had finally removed the polish. I need to speak with you, he said. May folded her arms. You can speak where everyone hears. Vincent nodded as if he deserved nothing else. He handed the folder to Nora. The deed is recorded. The Ashford Inn belongs to you, permanently. The lawsuit is being withdrawn today. My mother cannot take it. I cannot take it. No Harlow can. Nora opened the folder. Her hands shook so much that Eli moved closer, not touching her but standing near enough to catch the paper if it fell. There it was, her name printed in black ink beside the legal description of the land, the building, the garden, the porch, the rooms she had scrubbed back into life. Nora Bennett, owner. The dining room blurred. She thought she might sink to the floor, but May steadied her with one hand at her back. Vincent swallowed hard. Then, in front of the townspeople, customers, and the woman he had failed, he lowered himself to one knee on the porch boards Eli had repaired. Nora, he said. I was a coward. I let my mother lie because it was easier than asking the truth. I let you walk away on your birthday with keys to a ruin and no apology. You gave my family loyalty, care, and years of your life. We repaid you with humiliation. I am sorry. I know sorry does not rebuild what I broke, but I needed to say it where you could refuse it. Nora looked at him for a long time. The old Nora, the hotel Nora, would have hurried to comfort him. She would have said it was fine because she had been trained to protect powerful people from the consequences of their own choices. The woman standing on the porch of the lantern table did not hurry. She looked at the garden, the sign, the customers holding coffee cups, May with her fierce little chin, Caleb pretending not to cry, Eli steady beside her. I forgive you, Vincent, she said finally. Not because you deserve peace, but because I do. But I will never work for your family again. I will never make myself small enough to fit inside your guilt. What you handed me to break me became the place where I learned my own name. Vincent bowed his head. That sentence did what punishment could not. It showed him the measure of what he had lost. He stood, thanked her for answering, and left without entering the dining room. Nora watched the car disappear down the road. Then May clapped once and said, Well, if justice is done, somebody had better take the peach pies out before they burn. Laughter broke the spell. Nora laughed with everyone else, though tears still wet her face. She returned to the kitchen, and the smell of peaches rose warm and golden into the afternoon. By evening, the news had spread. The lawsuit was withdrawn. The deed was recorded. The lantern table was safe. People came not only to buy cake but to touch the porch rail as if it were a lucky charm. Nora served until her feet ached and slept that night with the folder under her pillow. Helena's world shrank quickly. The charity board removed her name from the spring gala. The hotel investors demanded distance. Celeste, the niece whose convenience had started the whole cruelty, moved out after hearing the leaked recording and left a note that said, I needed help, not a throne built on someone's pain. Staff resigned. Applicants stopped answering calls. Guests who still came whispered in the lobby and watched Helena cross the marble floor as if observing a cracked statue. For the first time in decades, Helena had to notice the labor that had made her life smooth. Flowers wilted, silver dulled, sheets came back folded wrong. One evening, after the last temporary cleaner quit mid-shift, Helena found herself alone in a banquet room after a corporate dinner. Plates sat on tables. Wine glasses clouded the linen. A mop bucket waited near the service door. There was no Nora to summon, no invisible hand to restore order before morning. Helena lifted the mop as if it were an insult and began to clean beneath chandeliers that reflected one small, furious woman, over and over. Vincent did not enjoy her fall. Regret was not entertainment. He sold part of the hotel, settled unpaid staff claims, and wrote letters to former employees whose names he should have known sooner. Grace came home for summer and asked to visit Nora. Vincent said Nora owed them nothing. Grace went anyway, alone, with a bouquet of daisies and a face full of fear. Nora saw her through the window and froze. Grace was taller now, 15, with her father's eyes and none of his armor. She stood at the gate clutching flowers. "I did not know," Grace said before Nora could speak. "I am sorry I was not there." Nora opened the gate. "Children are not responsible for adults who lie," she said. Grace stepped into her arms and sobbed like the feverish little girl Nora had once carried through the hotel corridor. The embrace healed nothing completely, but it returned one truth to its proper place. Love, given to a child, had never been wasted. Summer turned the lantern table into a destination. Travelers took the scenic road to Bellwether just to see the inn from the news. Nora expanded the menu slowly, refusing to let fame ruin the table. Apple cake stayed. Lemon cookies returned, this time served proudly in a glass jar by the register. Peach pies sold out before noon. On Sundays, she cooked a community breakfast for anyone who needed one, no questions asked. The donation jar covered most of it. When it did not, Eli quietly filled the gap until Nora caught him and threatened to put his name on a plaque for public embarrassment. Their friendship deepened in the ordinary places. Eli carried flour sacks. Nora fixed his coffee before he asked. He taught her to use a circular saw, and she taught him to braid dough. Caleb began doing homework at the corner table and eventually admitted the lantern table was less annoying than his own house. May watched all of it with the satisfied expression of a woman who had read the last chapter early. One night after closing, a storm rolled over the hills. It was not like the first storm. The roof held, the windows held, the fireplace glowed. Nora and Eli sat on the porch while rain softened the road. For a while they listened without speaking. Then Eli said, "My wife died in March 3 years ago. For a long time, I thought the house was the problem because every room hurt. Then you came here and made a burned place warm. It made me wonder whether grief can be renovated too." Nora did not answer quickly. She knew the danger of wounded people leaning on each other too hard. But she also knew the quiet respect in Eli's hands, the way he never stepped into her life without knocking. She reached across the space between their chairs and touched his fingers. "Maybe not renovated," she said. "Maybe given new windows." Eli smiled, and for Nora, that smile felt like sunrise on a room she had kept locked. The first anniversary of her arrival came with clear weather. Nora almost forgot the date until she found the old blue blouse in a drawer, folded beside her first apron. The fabric still carried faint stains from that day at the hotel. She held it for a long time. A year earlier, she had believed herself finished. Now the dining room below hummed with morning voices, May's laugh, coffee cups, Caleb complaining about college applications, and someone at the counter asking for extra whipped cream. Nora went downstairs expecting an ordinary rush. Instead, the lights were dimmed, and every table was full of people standing silent. For one terrifying second, she thought something had happened. Then May began singing Happy Birthday in a voice so off-key that everyone joined quickly to rescue the melody. Eli came from the kitchen carrying a chocolate cake with a glossy top and one crooked candle. Caleb followed with lemon cookies arranged on the blue plates. Grace, who had asked permission to come, stood near the door holding daisies. Nora covered her mouth. Nobody had celebrated her birthday in years. She had baked for guests, donors, brides, executives, children, and strangers. She had carried cakes through service corridors for parties where her name was never spoken. Now a room full of people sang to her in a building that had once dripped rain on her suitcase. The candle trembled in the center of Eli's imperfect cake. "Make a wish," May said. Nora looked around. The porch was repaired. The deed was locked in her desk. The garden waited for spring. The taped dollar still hung behind the counter. The old beams carried their burn marks proudly. Eli's eyes were soft. Caleb was smiling without hiding it. Grace was wiping her cheeks. Customers, neighbors, and friends stood shoulder to shoulder, not because they pitied her, but because they belonged to one another around the table she had built. Nora bent to the candle. She did not ask for revenge. She did not ask for the Harlows to suffer. She did not ask for the past to disappear. She wished only to remember, on every hard day still to come, that a life can begin in the place someone else meant as an ending. Then she blew out the flame, and the room erupted in applause. Eli set the cake down and, in front of everyone, said, "Nora Bennett, I love the way you turn broken things into welcome. I love the way you feed people before asking what they can pay. I love the way you survived without becoming cruel. If you will let me, I would like to keep choosing this table with you." The room fell into a silence so tender that even May behaved herself. Nora looked at Eli, at the flower on his sleeve, at the shy terror in his eyes, and laughed through tears. "You already do," she said. Then she took his hand, and Bellwether cheered loudly enough to startle birds from the maple trees outside. Months later, a magazine would call the Lantern Table a miracle business. A food blogger would describe Nora's apple cake as humble perfection. A tourism board would add the inn to a weekend guide. Those things helped, but they were never the center. The center was a table where a dismissed woman learned that dignity did not need permission, where neighbors became family, where a burned roof did not prevent light from entering, and where every lemon cookie carried the taste of a birthday finally remembered. As for the Harlow Grand, it still stood on Harbor Avenue, polished and expensive, but people said it felt colder. Vincent worked to repair what he could, though some losses do not return just because regret becomes sincere. Helena lived in a smaller suite after selling her townhouse, surrounded by furniture too perfect to comfort her. Sometimes, late at night, she saw videos of the Lantern Table online and watched Nora smiling beside customers who knew her name. Helena would close the screen, but not before seeing the sign over the door, painted again by a local artist in deep gold letters. The sign did not mention revenge. It did not mention billionaires, lawsuits, or humiliation. It simply said, "The Lantern Table, welcome home." That was what made it unbearable to Helena and unforgettable to everyone else. Nora had not destroyed the people who harmed her. She had done something far more powerful. She had built a life so warm that their cruelty looked small beside it. And on quiet mornings, before customers arrived, Nora still swept the porch herself. She did it not because she had to, but because the first clean line she ever swept through the ash had saved her. She would stand with the broom in her hands, watching sunlight slide over the repaired boards, and remember the woman who had arrived with one suitcase and no birthday call. Then May would shout from across the road that coffee was getting cold, Eli would unlock the kitchen door, Caleb would complain from the garden, and Grace would text a photograph from School of Daisies blooming near her window. Nora would smile, step inside, and light the ovens. The inn no longer smelled of smoke. It smelled of butter, apples, coffee, rain on warm wood, and second chances. People came for the cake, but they stayed because every corner told the truth. A person can be discarded by the powerful and still become the center of a home. A gift meant as an insult can become a kingdom. A woman who was told to leave can open a door for everyone else. And this time, when the town sang for her, Nora did not wonder whether she deserved it. She knew. Before the news trucks, before the court papers, before strangers would drive through rain just to taste her pies, there were long, silent afternoons when Nora nearly gave up. The audience should feel those hours because victory without weight feels cheap. One afternoon in early spring, the water pump failed while she was washing soot from a stack of rescued cups. Brown water spat from the tap and died. Nora stood with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, soap on her arms, and a sink full of dishes that now looked impossible. She did not scream. She did not have energy for screaming. She sat on an overturned crate in the kitchen and stared at the useless faucet until the room blurred. Then May knocked on the back door with a bucket in each hand and said, "I heard silence," and decided silence was suspicious. May brought more than water. She brought a way of refusing despair. She made Nora name one task at a time. Not the whole inn, not the whole future, just the sink, just the pump, just the next wall. Nora began to repeat that lesson whenever panic came. She wrote it on a scrap of paper and taped it above the counter. Just the next thing. When customers later praised her bravery, she would think of that paper and almost laugh. Bravery had not felt like thunder. It had felt like washing one cup, borrowing one bucket, patching one hole, and sleeping before fear could list the rest. Eli understood this language because grief had taught it to him. He never told Nora, at first, how his wife Maren died after a short illness that stole her breath and then stole the sound from his house. But his hands told pieces of it. They paused before touching old floral curtains because Maren had loved flowers. They tightened when Caleb mentioned hospitals. They lingered on broken hinges as if he knew all about doors that would not close cleanly. Nora noticed without prying. That was why Eli stayed. She had been examined by rich people for years. Being quietly seen felt different. Caleb also changed with the inn. At first he came because his father made him. He painted with one earbud in, answered questions with shrugs, and rolled his eyes when May asked if he had eaten. Then Nora discovered he could draw. She found sketches on paper bags near the register, the old sign, May's hands around a coffee cup, Eli on a ladder, Nora kneading dough with her head bent. Caleb expected teasing. Instead, Nora asked him to design the first real menu. He spent 3 nights on it and pretended the result was no big deal. When the menu hung behind the counter, his ears turned red from pride. The inn gathered people's hidden talents the way dust once gathered in corners. Mr. Alvarez wrote small history notes about the building and placed them in frames. The mechanic, whose name was Ruth despite everyone calling her Mac, rebuilt the garden gate and painted tiny moons along the top. A choir director from the church tested the dining room acoustics by singing one verse of an old hymn and made Nora cry into the dish towel. None of them treated the place as charity. They treated it as a shared dare. Could a burned inn become the warmest room in the county? Every person who helped answered yes with their hands. Nora kept one room upstairs closed for months. The fire had burned hottest there. The ceiling was black, the floor weak, and the window looked toward the highway where the hotel guests' cars sometimes passed without stopping. The room frightened her because it looked like the version of herself Helena wanted preserved, damaged, hidden, useful, only as proof of failure. One Sunday after breakfast, Eli found Nora standing outside the door with a pry bar. He did not ask if she was sure. He only got his gloves. Together they opened the room. Ash floated in the sunlight. Under a collapsed shelf, Nora found a brass lantern, dented but whole, its glass cracked in a star shape. May said it belonged to the Ashford family, who once ran the inn for travelers during winter storms. Nora cleaned it carefully and set it on the counter. Later, when she searched for a business name, her eyes kept returning to that lantern. It had survived fire without pretending it had not been burned. That was the kind of beauty Nora could believe in. The opening day was not smooth. The coffee machine hissed like an angry cat. The first batch of muffins sank in the middle. A delivery of flour went to the wrong address, and Nora considered locking the door and pretending the whole idea had been a fever dream. May refused to allow it. She stood outside with a handbell from the church yard sale and rang it so loudly that people came down the street just to stop the noise. By noon, every uneven muffin was sold, and 3 customers asked whether the sunken centers were a special family style. Nora said yes, because survival sometimes needs marketing. Small details made the business believable. Nora learned to write receipts, track costs, and say no when people asked for too much credit. She learned that eggs rose in price without mercy, and that customers who praised loudly did not always tip. She learned to wake at 4, mix dough before 5, bake by 6, and smile by 7, even when her back ached. Success did not arrive like a parade. It arrived like another chore she was grateful to have. The money went first to repairs, then taxes, then a proper sign, then a used refrigerator that hummed like an old man clearing his throat. There were mistakes. She forgot salt in a batch of rolls and fed them to the chickens behind May's house. She overbooked pie orders for Thanksgiving and cried at midnight while Eli peeled apples beside her in silence. She trusted a supplier who delivered spoiled berries and had to refund half a day's sales. Each error felt, for a moment, like proof Helena had been right. Then someone would return the next morning anyway, and Nora would realize that real community did not demand perfection as rent. The day Piper posted the photos, Nora was not prepared for strangers to call her inspiring. The word made her uncomfortable. She knew the private cost behind the public glow. There were days she had not eaten until evening. There were nights she woke thinking she smelled hotel lilies and felt the office carpet under her shoes. She still flinched when a wealthy woman snapped her fingers for service. Inspiration was what people saw from the road. The truth was messier and maybe stronger. She had kept moving while afraid. That was all. Piper returned after the viral post with flowers and an apology. "I did not know it would get so big," she said. Nora looked at the line outside the door, at May organizing customers like a general, at Caleb filming the crowd for social media, and at Eli trying to install a second coffee urn while 3 people asked him questions at once. Then Nora laughed. "Well, it is too late to be small now." Piper stayed to wash dishes for 4 hours. That became another rule of the lantern table. If the story touched you and the sink was full, you were allowed to help. The news segment brought beauty and pressure together. Some visitors came with genuine hearts. Others came wanting a picture of sadness they could post beside their own face. Nora learned to protect the story without hardening her heart. When someone asked her to hold the old keys and look miserable for a photograph, May stepped between them and said, "Buy a scone or buy manners, but do not buy her pain." The video of that moment also spread, and May became briefly famous as the dragon at the gate. She enjoyed it far more than she admitted. Grace's discovery mattered because it showed the damage of lies inside the rich house as well as outside it. She remembered Nora's hands braiding her hair before school events, Nora slipping notes into lunchboxes when Vincent forgot, Nora sitting beside her bed during storms. To learn that this woman had been dismissed as if those years meant nothing broke something innocent in Grace. Her call forced Vincent to face not only what he had done to an employee, but what he had taught his daughter about gratitude. Shame entered him through fatherhood, and therefore it could not be ignored. Vincent's memories became evidence against him. He remembered the winter gala when Nora caught a falling centerpiece and burned her wrist on candle wax, but returned to work after wrapping it in a towel. He remembered Grace at 6, refusing soup unless Nora made it. He remembered Helena calling staff by their uniforms rather than names. He remembered choosing not to correct her because the room was full of donors. Each memory asked the same question. When did convenience become character? He had no answer that did not accuse him. Helena's cruelty had roots, but roots did not excuse fruit. She had grown up in a family where servants were proof of success and apology was considered weakness. She believed order required distance. She believed names gave people too much shape. Nora had disturbed her not by rebellion, but by being loved, despite Helena's refusal to see her. Grace loved Nora. Guests praised Nora's desserts. Staff trusted Nora more than management. To Helena, that loyalty looked like theft. So she removed Nora and expected the world to become orderly again. The lawsuit was Helena's attempt to restore the old map. On that map, property mattered more than labor, reputation more than truth, and women like Nora could be moved from one corner to another without leaving marks. But the lantern table had changed the map. It had witnesses. It had photographs. It had people who had held ladders and stirred jam and watched Nora bleed from splinters while making something beautiful. Helena could not understand that a deed might record ownership, but a community records belonging. The legal aid attorney, Sophia Reed, arrived 2 days after the notice. She was not related to Nora, though May declared the shared surname a sign from heaven. Sophia wore plain black shoes, carried a canvas bag full of folders, and listened more than she spoke. She asked for every document, every message, every photograph, every receipt for repairs. Nora apologized for the mess. Sophia looked around the dining room and said, "This is not a mess. This is a timeline with curtains." For the first time since the envelope arrived, Nora felt the shape of defense. Sophia explained the danger honestly. A recorded deed would have been stronger. A signed transfer helped. Receipts helped. Witnesses helped. Public outrage helped less than people imagined. Courts did not run on comments. Nora listened with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles whitened. Then Sophia added, "But they made a mistake. They thought you were alone. Cases change when one side has money and the other side has memory organized into evidence." Nora exhaled. May immediately volunteered to organize memory and demanded 3 colored folders. For the next week, the lantern table became half bakery, half command center. Customers labeled photographs by date. Caleb scanned receipts. Mr. Alvarez wrote a statement about the first repairs. Mac described the gate before and after. May wrote 8 pages and had to be gently told that calling Helena a velvet snake would not help in court. Eli brought invoices for lumber that he had never charged Nora for and marked them donated. Each paper said the same thing in a different voice. Nora had not occupied the inn like a temporary guest. She had resurrected it like an owner. At the same time, Helena's lawyer began to hesitate. He had expected a frightened former employee, not a public record of mockery and a village prepared to testify. He warned Helena that the leaked message was harmful. Helena said emotions were irrelevant. He warned that Vincent's signature appeared on transfer documents. Helena said signatures could be contextual. He warned that judges disliked parties who slept on their rights, while another person invested labor. Helena said judges respected families like hers. The lawyer looked at her pearls and realized she had mistaken wealth for immunity. Vincent's decision to record the deed did not make him heroic. The script should not frame him as the savior. He was a man arriving late with a key to a door Nora had already forced open. His action mattered because it stopped further harm, not because it created her success. That distinction is important. When he stood at the clerk's office, he was not giving Nora a life. He was finally removing his family's hand from the life she had built despite them. After the porch apology, Nora struggled with the attention. People wanted her to say something grand about forgiveness. Interviewers called again. A morning show producer offered travel and makeup. Nora declined. Her answer on the porch had been for Vincent, for herself, and for the witnesses who loved her. She did not want to turn forgiveness into performance. Instead, she wrote a small note and taped it beside the register. We serve food here, not bitterness. But we do recommend boundaries with every slice. May called the note scripture. Eli called it good business. Caleb turned it into a design for shirts, which sold out faster than expected. Nora laughed at the absurdity of strangers wearing her boundary joke across their chests, yet the line helped people. Women pointed to it when telling friends about leaving bad workplaces. Men quoted it when apologizing to daughters. The internet, for once, carried something useful instead of only fire. Grace's visit became a tender complication. Nora loved the girl, but she would not let the Harlow family use affection as a bridge back to control. She told Grace the truth gently. You may come as yourself, not as a messenger. You may sit at my table, but you may not ask me to return to theirs. Grace nodded, solemn and older than 15 should be. Over time, she came during school breaks, helped frost cookies badly, and learned that love can survive a family's wrongdoing without pretending it did not happen. The Harlow Grand's decline was not sudden ruin, because real consequences often arrive as erosion. A canceled gala here, a lost investor there, a kitchen supervisor leaving with 3 staff members after demanding better pay. Vincent began reforms, but trust, once broken, did not refill like a vase. He attended meetings where people looked at him and saw not a leader, but a man who had needed a public scandal to notice human beings. That judgment was fair, and fairness hurt more than attack. Helena hated obscurity most. She could withstand criticism if people still feared her. What broke her was being unnecessary. Committees replaced her. Younger philanthropists avoided photographs with her. The charity group where she had once received laughing messages reformed without her under a different name. When she entered shops, conversations paused and then continued without invitation. She had spent her life refusing to see certain people. Now society gave her a taste of that invisibility, and she found it unbearable. There is a scene late in the story where Helena drives past the lantern table at dusk. She tells the driver not to slow, but traffic forces the car to stop. Through the window, she sees the porch glowing with string lights, sees May laughing at an outside table, sees Eli carrying a tray, sees Nora greeting a family by name. Nobody on that porch knows Helena is there. Nobody performs triumph for her. That is why the moment cuts. Helena expected to remain the center of Nora's pain. Instead, she has become irrelevant to Nora's joy. Inside the inn that evening, Nora is teaching Caleb how to make lemon cookies. He measures too much sugar, and Grace teases him, and May insists all mistakes should be tested before judgment. Eli watches Nora move through the kitchen with ease. The old hotel version of her had moved like someone making room for everyone else. This Nora occupies space without apology. She wipes flour on her apron, laughs with her whole face, and opens the oven to a burst of golden heat. That image is the answer to Helena's caption. The anniversary celebration should feel earned because every person in the room carries part of the journey. Mr. Alvarez brings a framed photograph of the inn on its first clean morning. Mac brings a small metal moon for the sign. Piper sends flowers from 2 towns away. Sophia, the attorney, arrives with a pie she bought from Nora because she says lawyers should not bake unsupervised. Grace brings daisies because she remembers Nora liking simple flowers in hotel vases. Caleb brings the cake stand he built in shop class. None of these gifts are expensive. That is why they matter. When Eli confesses his love, it should not feel like the prize for suffering. Nora is not rewarded with a man. She is met by one who respects the woman she has become. The romance works because he stands beside her without taking over the story. He has watched her choose herself again and again. His love is not rescue, it is recognition. Nora's answer, "You already do," tells the audience that love has been present in repaired boards, peeled apples, carried flour, and quiet space. Long before any public declaration, the final image of Nora lighting the ovens is important. The story began with her walking into a workplace where her labor disappeared into someone else's luxury. It ends with her beginning work in a place that bears her choices, her name, and her welcome. She is still working hard. She is still sweeping, baking, serving. The difference is ownership, respect, and community. The script should never suggest dignity means escaping labor. It should show that labor becomes sacred when it is not stolen. Years could pass, and Nora would still keep the first keys in a jar on the shelf, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. They were ugly keys, dark with rust, tied to a tag from the Harlow archives. Sometimes visitors asked about them. Nora would say, "Those opened the door to the worst day of my life." Then she would smile and add, "They also opened this one." People understood. Pain and possibility often arrive wearing the same coat. The difference is what a person builds after the door opens. One winter, when snow covered Bellwether and travelers filled the inn's 3 restored upstairs rooms, Nora finally slept in the room that had once frightened her most. The burned ceiling had been cleaned, but not hidden. The brass lantern sat on the windowsill. Wind moved softly beyond the glass. She lay under a handmade quilt and listened to guests laughing below after supper. No rain came through the roof. No phone lay silent with birthday disappointment. No powerful woman decided whether she belonged. Nora closed her eyes in a room that had survived fire, and she slept like someone who had come home. The moral should be felt, not announced too heavily. A cruel person may hand you ruins because ruins are all they believe you deserve, but sometimes ruins contain space. Space for a table, space for a garden, space for neighbors to cross the road, space for the self you buried under obedience to stand up and breathe. Nora did not win because the world suddenly became fair. She won because she kept making fair choices inside an unfair world until enough people gathered to make fairness visible. For pacing, the narration should linger on sensory details whenever emotion peaks. The rain in the roasting pan, the smell of apple cake in a smoke-stained kitchen, the scrape of a broom through ash, the legal paper trembling in flour-covered hands, the porch boards under Vincent's knees, the birthday candle reflected in Nora's tears. These images let viewers feel the story instead of only hearing events. They are the anchors that make a long script hold attention. The final spoken narration can return to the title's promise. The billionaire thought the burned inn was an ending. Helena thought humiliation could be wrapped as generosity. Vincent thought silence could keep peace. They were all wrong. The burned inn became a bakery, a shelter, a courtroom of public memory, a school for courage, and finally a home. The woman they dismissed became the person everyone came to find. Not because she became rich in the way they understood riches, but because she became impossible to make invisible again. After the birthday celebration, Nora made one decision that surprised the town. She reopened 2 rooms upstairs, not for luxury guests, but for people in transition. One room was for a woman leaving a bad home who needed 3 quiet nights before facing court. Another was for a discharged nurse who had lost housing after an injury. Nora did not advertise the rooms online. May called it the lantern list, and Sophia helped make simple rules so kindness would not become chaos. Guests paid what they could, and when they could not, they washed dishes, weeded the garden, or read stories to children during Sunday breakfast. Nora understood that shelter without dignity was another kind of trap. So every guest received a key, a clean towel, and the right to close a door. The first woman to stay was June, a hairdresser with a split lip and a purse full of documents. She arrived after dark, shaking so hard that she could not hold the teacup May placed in her hands. Nora showed her the restored room with the brass lantern on the sill and said, "No one will ask you to explain tonight. Sleep first." In the morning, June came downstairs and found eggs, toast, and a small vase of marigolds on the table. She cried because the flowers were not necessary. Nora knew exactly why they mattered. Necessity keeps people alive. Beauty reminds them they are still people. That line became part of the inn's private gospel. Beauty reminds them. It shaped the way Nora ran everything. She bought second-hand plates that did not match but shone when polished. She placed fresh herbs in jars on each table. She asked Caleb to paint tiny lanterns on the menus. She told volunteers that free meals should look as cared for as paid orders. Some donors wanted their names printed on signs. Nora thanked them, took the checks if the conditions were clean, and refused every offer that turned suffering into display. She had been displayed once by Helena's cruelty. She would not let charity repeat the injury with nicer words. The lantern table also changed Bellwether's economy in small, practical ways. The orchard outside town began selling Nora bruised apples at a fair price instead of dumping them. A retired carpenter made shelves for her jam jars and received enough orders from visitors to reopen his shop 2 days a week. Teenagers earned money during summer washing berries and folding boxes. Max started a repair circle on Thursday nights for people who wanted to fix old furniture rather than throw it away. The inn became proof that restoration could spread outward, from building to business, from business to street, from street to town. Not every day was noble. Some days Nora was tired of being a symbol. She wanted to burn toast without someone calling it a lesson. She wanted to say no without writing a speech about boundaries. She wanted one quiet bath without remembering the broken sink from her first week. On those days, Eli would close the kitchen early. May would pretend the town was under emergency pie restrictions, and Caleb would make a sign saying, "The owner is being human today. Come back tomorrow." Customers laughed, but they respected it. Nora learned that rest was not ingratitude. Rest was maintenance for a life she intended to keep. One autumn morning, Helena entered the farmer's market while Nora was selling jars of apple butter under a yellow tent. The market noise thinned around them. Helena looked smaller in daylight, without chandeliers or hotel marble to amplify her. Her coat was expensive, but one button hung loose. She picked up a jar, read the label, and set it down as if it were heavier than glass. For a heartbeat, Nora thought Helena might apologize. Instead, Helena said, "You have done well for yourself." The words tried to sound generous and failed. Nora did not bow her head. "Yes," she said. "I have." Helena's mouth tightened. Around them, people pretended not to listen and listened completely. Nora could have listed every wound. She could have named the birthday, the keys, the caption, the lawsuit. She did not need to, the market already knew, so she added only one sentence. "I hope one day you learn how much peace there is in not needing to make others feel small." Helena left without buying anything. May bought the jar she had touched and declared it cleansed by profit. That encounter became another turning point. Though quieter than the lawsuit, Nora realized she no longer rehearsed speeches to people who had hurt her. She did not need Helena to understand in order to be free. That was the last hook the past had in her. Forgiveness had opened one hand. Indifference opened the other. With both hands free, she could knead dough, plant bulbs, hold Eli's fingers, and lift June's suitcase to the safe room upstairs. Freedom, she discovered, was not a single dramatic exit. It was the daily absence of chains she had stopped polishing. Winter brought the first lantern supper, a long table set from the counter to the front door. Everyone brought something. Mr. Alvarez brought stories about the inn's early owners. Mac brought stew in a pot large enough for a small army. Grace, home from school, brought daisies even though snow had made them expensive. Vincent sent a handwritten donation and did not come, which Nora appreciated more than his presence would have allowed. Helena sent nothing. The evening ended with people lighting small candles in rescued jars and placing them along the porch rail. From the road, the old inn looked like a constellation that had decided to land. During that supper, Nora stood to thank everyone and found herself unable to speak for several seconds. The room waited. A year and a half earlier, silence had meant dismissal. Now silence meant patience. She looked at the faces turned toward her and understood the difference so deeply that tears came before words. Finally, she said, "I used to think a home was a place someone allowed you to stay. You taught me that a home is a place where people help one another become more themselves. That is what this table is. That is what you gave me back." May cried loudly. Eli pretended to check the candles. Caleb recorded the speech and later posted only the final line because he said the internet did not deserve everything. Still, the clip traveled. Viewers wrote from distant cities, saying they wanted a lantern table where they lived. Nora answered as many as she could, always with the same advice. Start with one table, feed one person well, learn one name you used to pass by, repair one thing instead of replacing it. The work of welcome sounds grand only after it grows. At the beginning, it is usually just soup. In the final scene, years are not needed. One ordinary morning is enough. Dawn opens over Bellwether. The road is damp from night rain, but the roof does not leak. Nora unlocks the front door and pauses, as she always does, before turning the sign. The jar with the old keys catches the first light. Behind her, Eli laughs in the kitchen because a tray has tilted. May knocks with coffee she claims is superior. Upstairs, a guest in the safe room sleeps without fear. Outside, the porch waits for footsteps. Nora breathes in apples, butter, wood, smoke, and rain, then turns the sign to welcome. The camera should stay there a moment. No mansion, no courtroom, no villain watching. Just a woman who was fired on her birthday opening a door that belongs to her. Just a burned-in made warm. Just the quiet answer to every person who ever mistook cruelty for power. Nora Bennett does not need to be rescued, pitied, or approved. She is busy feeding people from a place that once looked finished. And because of that, the whole town knows what Helena never understood. A person who has found her worth cannot be made invisible again. The lantern over the door kept shining long after the ovens cooled for the evening. People passing on the road saw it and remembered that warmth can be chosen. Inside, Nora counted the day's receipts, but she also counted stories, names, and small victories. Those were the riches no cruel family could reclaim. When she finally locked up, she touched the old key jar and whispered thanks to the woman who had survived the first night. Then she climbed the stairs without fear, leaving the kitchen ready for another morning of welcome. The lantern over the door kept shining long after the ovens cooled for the evening. People passing on the road saw it and remembered that warmth can be chosen. Inside, Nora counted the day's receipts, but she also counted stories, names, and small victories. Those were the riches no cruel family could reclaim. The lantern over the door kept shining long after the ovens cooled for the evening.